Did people in the medieval world, way back in 1200 AD, truly play complex strategy games that shaped the minds of kings and generals? Were these not just simple pastimes, but serious tools for sharpening the very skills needed to rule vast lands and lead armies into brutal battles? Get ready to uncover the forgotten board games that shaped medieval strategists. Number 8. Fidchell, the Celtic game of strategy and sacrifice. Deep within the green hills and misty valleys of ancient Ireland, Wales, and Scotland, long before knights in shining armor became the defining image of the Middle Ages, a mysterious game held court. This was Fidchell, pronounced something like Fidchell, a game whispered about in epic sagas and heroic tales, often played by legendary kings and warriors. It was more than just a distraction. It was a mental arena, a place where strategic thinking was honed, a test for leaders in a world of constant conflict. Fidchell belonged to a family of games known as Tafla games, but it had its own unique flavor, deeply rooted in Celtic culture. While its exact rules remain a subject of historical debate and reconstruction, enough evidence from ancient texts and archaeological finds paints a picture of a game centered on capture, encirclement, and the desperate defense of a central king piece. The board, often square or rectangular, featured a grid with a special central square for the king. Pieces, usually differentiated by color, were arranged in a starting formation that often looked like a fortress under siege. Celtic chieftain, perhaps Brian Boru himself, could be found sitting across from a trusted advisor, the Fidchell board between them. Each move, each careful placement or bold advance mirrored the decisions a leader faced on the battlefield. The game typically featured a king piece, surrounded by a smaller number of his defenders, pitted against a larger attacking force. The king's goal was to escape to one of the board's edge squares, representing a safe haven or a successful retreat. The attackers, on the other hand, sought to capture the king by surrounding him on all four sides, or on three if he was against the board's edge. This setup immediately threw players into a dynamic of numerical disadvantage for the king's side, forcing them to think about maneuver, sacrifice, and the strategic use of limited resources. King's player had to plot escape routes, anticipate enemy blocking movements, and cleverly use their few defenders to open pathways or sacrifice themselves to delay the inevitable. The attacking player, with their numerical superiority, had to learn patience, how to coordinate multiple pieces, and how to slowly but surely tighten a net around their elusive target. It was less about brute force and more about coordinated pressure. One of the most intriguing aspects of Fidchell, as hinted in some ancient texts, was its connection to divination and prophecy. It was not just a game. It could be seen as a reflection of fate itself. Chieftain might play a game of Fidchell before a crucial battle, not just to practice tactics, but perhaps to gain insight, to read the flow of destiny through the intricate dance of the pieces. While this might seem superstitious to modern eyes, it underscored the game's deep cultural significance and its perceived ability to train not just tactical skills, but also a sense of intuitive understanding of complex situations. Consider the role of sacrifice in Fidchell. Often, a king's piece would need to sacrifice a defender to clear a path or to distract the attackers. This mirrored the harsh realities of medieval warfare, where flanks might be sacrificed, or small detachments held to buy time for a larger strategic objective. Playing Fidchell instilled a pragmatic understanding of when to give up a piece to gain a greater advantage, a lesson invaluable for any military leader. It was about seeing the bigger picture, the long game, even when individual pieces seemed to be lost. The historical sagas of Ireland, like The Wooing of Etain, speak of games of Fidchell being played in grand halls, often by figures of immense power and intellect. These stories do not depict Fidchell as a trivial pastime, but as an activity of significant mental engagement, a contest of wits that could have profound implications. It was a game fit for kings, because it trained them to think like kings. It sharpened their foresight, their ability to plan multiple moves ahead, and their adaptability when plans inevitably went awry. The attacking side in Fidchell had to learn to manage a large force, to avoid overextending their lines, and to maintain a coherent encirclement. This translated directly to the challenges of commanding a larger army, keeping units coordinated, and ensuring that individual initiatives did not compromise the overall strategic goal. The attackers needed to be relentless, but also patient, slowly choking off escape routes, much like a besieging army cutting off supplies to a castle. The beauty of Fidchell, and indeed many Tafle games, lay in its inherent asymmetry. Unlike chess, where both sides start with identical forces and goals, Fidchell presented two vastly different strategic puzzles. One player sought freedom and evasion with limited resources. The other sought capture and containment with overwhelming numbers. This asymmetry forced players to adopt completely different mindsets and strategies, fostering a flexible and adaptive approach to problem solving. A player who could master both sides of Fidchell was likely a formidable thinker, capable of understanding multiple perspectives in a conflict. The very mystery surrounding Fidchell, its ancient origins lost to some extent in the mists of time, only adds to its allure as a tool for strategic education. It was a game that connected its players to a rich tradition of Celtic heroism and cunning. It was not just about moving wooden pieces on a board. It was about engaging with a set of principles that had governed Celtic warfare and leadership for centuries. It taught vigilance, planning, and the difficult art of achieving victory, whether by escape or by total capture, in a world that demanded sharp wits for survival. The echo of those ancient games played in lamplit halls still speaks of a profound method for shaping minds capable of navigating a turbulent world. Number 7. Fox and Geese. The hunt and the escape on the simple board. Step away from the grand battlefields and royal courts for a moment, and journey to the quieter corners of medieval life. Here, on simpler boards, often drawn into tables or carved into stone, a game of cunning and pursuit unfolded. This was Fox and Geese, a delightful yet strategically deep asymmetrical game that became popular across Europe from the late Middle Ages, often played by common folk, but still offering lessons in strategy that would benefit anyone, from a clever merchant to a local lord. The game is played on a cross-shaped board, often with 33 points or holes. One player controls a single fox piece, while the other controls 13 geese pieces. The rules are beautifully simple. The fox can move to any adjacent empty point along the lines, and crucially, it can capture a goose by jumping over it to an empty point, similar to how checkers work. The geese, on the other hand, can only move forward or sideways to an adjacent empty point. They cannot move backward, and they cannot capture. The objectives are clear and opposing. The fox wins by capturing enough geese so that the remaining geese cannot trap him. The geese win by cornering the fox so that he cannot make any legal move, either by moving or by capturing. This immediate asymmetry is what makes Fox and Geese such a powerful educational tool. It forces players to think from two completely different perspectives, each with its own set of advantages and limitations. For the player controlling the fox, the game is a master class in evasion, calculated aggression, and strategic sacrifice. The fox must not only capture geese, but also ensure he does not become trapped. This means constantly assessing the board, identifying weak spots in the geese's formation, and predicting where the geese will attempt to wall him in. A successful fox player learns to use their single piece to its maximum potential, to create diversions, and to capitalize on even small errors by the opponent. Teaches the art of being nimble, opportunistic, and always looking for the escape route. It's like a single scout trying to sneak through enemy lines, taking out isolated sentries while avoiding the main patrol. On the other side, the player controlling the geese must learn patience, coordination, and the power of a unified front. Each individual goose is weak and cannot capture, but collectively they are a formidable force. The geese player must form a solid line or wall, slowly but surely advancing to hem in the fox. This requires excellent spatial reasoning and foresight, as a single gap in their formation can allow the agile fox to slip through, undoing many turns of careful positioning. It teaches the importance of collective action, of maintaining discipline, and of persistent, incremental progress. It's like a disciplined army slowly advancing, ensuring no gaps appear for the enemy to exploit. Historians suggest that games like Fox and Geese were not just played for entertainment, but also for honing practical skills. For those in rural communities, understanding the dynamics of a hunt, of trapping prey or protecting livestock, was vital. The game perfectly mirrored these real-world scenarios. A farmer playing the geese might instinctively understand the importance of keeping his flock together, while someone playing the fox might grasp the cleverness required to outsmart a trap. The simplicity of the board and pieces meant Fox and Geese could be played anywhere, by anyone. Did not require expensive materials, just a flat surface and a few distinct markers. This accessibility meant its lessons in strategy were widely disseminated. A young apprentice might play it during a break, learning to think ahead and adapt, skills useful in any trade. A local lord might play it with his retainers, subtly testing their ability to plan and coordinate. The game's inherent difficulty, particularly for the geese player, meant that mastering it required significant practice and mental effort. The fox, with its ability to move freely and capture, seems initially powerful, but the geese, if played correctly, can be overwhelming. This balance is precarious and beautiful, teaching players that even numerical superiority requires careful management, and that a single agile opponent can cause immense trouble if not contained. It was a perfect tool for developing basic tactical thinking without the complex rules of games like chess. It encouraged observation, pattern recognition, and problem solving. For instance, the geese player had to identify potential escape routes for the fox and block them off preemptively, often sacrificing a good attacking position to secure a vital defensive line. This is a fundamental strategic concept. Sometimes defense is the best defense, or securing your rear is more important than advancing. The enduring popularity of Fox and Geese throughout the medieval period and beyond speaks to its effectiveness as a teaching tool. It was a game that, despite its apparent simplicity, offered endless variations and challenges, forcing players to constantly reevaluate their strategies and adapt to the opponent's moves. It was not about grand armies or political intrigue, but about the fundamental dynamics of pursuit and evasion, of cooperation and individual initiative. It was a game that trained the mind to be resourceful, patient, and keenly aware of the interplay between movement and position, skills valuable in any walk of life, whether you were hunting a wily fox or planning a local defense. Number 6. Tabula, the Roman race game that taught probability and risk. Before the elaborate game boards of chess captivated medieval nobles, a more ancient yet equally compelling game ruled the tables of Europe. Tabula. This game, a direct descendant of the Roman ludus duodecim scriptorum, meaning game of 12 lines and a close cousin to modern backgammon, was a staple of leisure and learning from the Roman Empire right through the early Middle Ages. It was not just a race to move pieces, it was a furious contest of probability, risk assessment, and quick decision-making, skills crucial for anyone managing resources or planning expeditions in an unpredictable world. Tabula was played on a board typically featuring 2 rows of 12 points or spaces, arranged in a way that mimicked the layout of its modern counterpart. Each player had 15 pieces, and the movement of these pieces was dictated by the roll of 3 dice. The goal was simple: be the first to move all your pieces around the board following a set path and bear them off before your opponent. But the simplicity ended there. What made tabula a profound strategic educator was its reliance on dice. Unlike games of pure strategy where every move is calculated and known, tabula introduced an element of chance. This randomness forced players to think probabilistically. They had to assess the likelihood of certain dice rolls, weigh the risks of leaving pieces exposed, and make decisions under uncertainty. This was not about memorizing openings. It was about adapting on the fly, about understanding odds, and about making the best possible move with the hand fate dealt them. A medieval merchant planning a trade route would not know if bandits would appear, if a bridge would be out, or if the weather would turn. They would make decisions based on probabilities and risk. Tabula mirrored this perfectly. Player might have a safe move, but a risky move could offer a huge advantage if the dice were favorable. Learning when to take that risk and when to play it safe was a fundamental lesson from tabula. Trained a kind of flexible intelligence capable of adjusting to unexpected circumstances. Capturing mechanism in tabula also added layers of strategic depth. If a player landed on a point occupied by a single opponent piece, that piece was hit and sent back to the starting bar, forced to re-enter the game. This meant players had to carefully consider not just their own progression, but also the vulnerability of their pieces and the opportunity to disrupt their opponent. Leaving a single piece exposed was a gamble. Hitting an opponent's piece could set them back significantly, buying crucial time. The rules around bearing off pieces also demanded foresight. Players could only start bearing off their pieces once all of them had successfully reached their home board. This meant a player might be far ahead in the race, but if one of their pieces was sent back to the start, their entire progress was halted. This element taught patience and the importance of securing every piece before attempting the final dash. It was a lesson in meticulous planning and ensuring no weak links remained in a long-term endeavor. Historical accounts of tabula, or games very similar to it, reveal its widespread popularity. Emperor Claudius, a Roman emperor, was said to have been so fond of ludus duodecim scriptorum that he had a special board built onto his carriage so he could play while traveling. This fondness for such games continued through the Byzantine Empire, where the game of tabula was highly sophisticated. The Byzantine Emperor Zeno, in the late 5th century, is famously recorded as having played a game of tabula, where he made a disastrous series of rolls that led to his defeat, a testament to the game's unpredictability and the need for quick strategic thinking. For medieval nobles and educated individuals, tabula provided a valuable training ground for the mind. It honed arithmetic skills implicitly, as players constantly calculated potential moves and assessed probabilities. It developed tactical awareness, forcing players to see not just their own path, but also the blocking positions and opportunities of their opponent. It instilled resilience, as even a good position could be ruined by bad dice. Roles and players had to learn to recover from setbacks. The game also taught a crucial lesson in resource management: how to deploy and protect your 15 pieces effectively, when to consolidate them, and when to spread them out. It was a dynamic balance between offense and defense, a constant push and pull between advancing your own pieces and hindering your opponents. Beyond the mental gymnastics, tabula was also a social game, often played in taverns and aristocratic homes. The interactions around the board, the discussions of strategy, and the commiseration over bad rolls fostered camaraderie and shared understanding. It was a way for people to engage in competitive mental sport, learning from each other and sharpening their wits in a relaxed but challenging environment. Tabula, with its blend of chance and strategy, stands as a testament to the medieval appreciation for games that mirrored the uncertainties of life. It was not about perfect planning in a controlled environment, but about navigating a world where randomness played a significant role. It taught its players how to react to the unexpected, how to manage risk, and how to stay focused on a long-term goal even when short-term obstacles arose. These were skills that served medieval people well, whether they were commanding armies, managing estates, or simply trying to make a living in a bustling marketplace. Number 5. Nine Men's Morris, the strategic dance of position and capture. Travel to almost any medieval village square or grand hall, and you might have spotted a familiar sight carved into stone benches, wooden boards, or even just drawn in the dirt. A grid of 3 concentric squares connected by lines. This simple yet deceptively deep game was Nine Men's Morris, or Morels, as it was sometimes called. Though perhaps less flashy than grand war games, its widespread presence across Europe from Roman times through the Middle Ages speaks volumes about its power as a strategic education tool, particularly for honing spatial reasoning, planning, and tactical precision. Nine Men's Morris is an abstract strategy game for 2 players. Each player starts with 9 pieces, typically pegs or stones. The game unfolds in 3 phases. First players take turns, placing their pieces one by one on the 24 points of the board. The goal during this placement phase is to form mills, which are 3 of one's own pieces in a straight line along any of the board's designated lines. When a player forms a mill, they immediately get to remove one of their opponent's pieces from the board, but not a piece that is already part of an opponent's mill unless no other pieces are available. Second, once all 18 pieces are placed, players take turns moving one of their pieces along a line to an adjacent empty point. The objective remains the same: form mills and remove opponent pieces. Third, if a player is reduced to only 3 pieces, they gain the ability to fly or jump, meaning they can move any of their pieces to any empty point on the board, not just adjacent ones. This often gives them a last chance to form mills and recover. The game ends when one player is reduced to fewer than 3 pieces, making it impossible for them to form a mill, or when they are blocked from making any moves. The beauty of Nine Men's Morris lies in its elegant simplicity and the profound strategic thinking it demands. It is a game of pure position and anticipation, with no element of chance. Every move, every placement, every capture is a direct consequence of the player's choices. For a young squire or a village elder, playing Nine Men's Morris was a master class in foresight. During the initial placement phase, players had to think several moves ahead. Where would their opponent place their pieces? How could they block potential mills while simultaneously setting up their own? This required a highly developed sense of spatial awareness and the ability to visualize the board state many turns into the future. It taught the importance of controlling key points on the board, particularly the corners and the central points, which offered more opportunities for forming mills. The concept of a mill taught tactical efficiency. Every time a mill was formed, an opponent's piece was removed, directly weakening their force. This encouraged players to actively seek out mill opportunities, while vigilantly defending against their opponent's attempts. It was a constant dance of offense and defense, of creating threats and neutralizing them. This direct consequence of actions was a powerful lesson in cause and effect. Furthermore, Nine Men's Morris taught a crucial strategic concept known as double mills, or two-way mills. This is where a single piece can be used to form 2 different mills on consecutive turns. By forming one mill, removing an opponent's piece, and then moving the key piece out of that mill to form another, the player could achieve a powerful chain reaction. Mastering this maneuver required a deep understanding of piece interaction and the ability to set up complex sequences of moves. For a medieval commander, this might translate to understanding how to reposition a small unit to simultaneously defend one flank and threaten another, gaining multiple advantages from a single action. The game also taught resource management. Each player started with 9 pieces, a limited resource. Losing pieces meant fewer opportunities to form mills and increased vulnerability. Players had to decide which of their opponent's pieces to remove. Was it better to remove a piece that was part of a strong defensive structure, or one that was poised to form a mill? These decisions required careful evaluation of the immediate threat versus the long-term impact on the opponent's overall strength. The flying phase, when a player is reduced to 3 pieces, added an element of desperate ingenuity. Suddenly, a player with only 3 pieces could jump anywhere, making them incredibly agile and dangerous if their opponent was not careful. This taught resilience and the power of changing tactics when faced with severe limitations. It also instilled in the dominant player a lesson against complacency. A seemingly defeated opponent could still snatch victory if not managed carefully. Archaeological evidence shows 9 men's Morris boards carved into the cloisters of English cathedrals, on the steps of Roman temples, and even on board fragments recovered from Viking settlements. Its ubiquity suggests its value was recognized across different cultures and social strata. It was a game that could be played by anyone, anywhere, requiring only a few stones and a surface to draw a grid. This accessibility made it an informal but widespread training ground for strategic thinking. For a young person learning to manage an estate, or to plan a journey, or even just to navigate social complexities, the lessons from 9 men's Morris were directly applicable. It fostered logical thinking, the ability to anticipate reactions, and the discipline to execute a long-term plan, even as immediate opportunities arose. It was a quiet, mental exercise, a game of precise movements and strategic patience, shaping minds long before formal education encompassed such tactical lessons. The enduring popularity of 9 men's Morris in medieval times stands as a testament to its effectiveness as a practical school for the mind. Number 4. Alker, the ancient ancestor of checkers, and its theatal lessons. Before the modern game of checkers captivated parlors and taverns, its ancient ancestor, Alcarki, dominated the strategic landscape of the medieval world, especially in Spain and the Middle East. Its roots stretch back even further potentially to ancient Egypt, making it one of the oldest known board games of pure strategy. Alcarki was more than just a pastime. It was a rigorous training ground for quick tactical decisions, aggressive piece management, and the art of setting traps. The game is played on a 5x5 grid of 25 points, with lines connecting adjacent points horizontally, vertically, and diagonally. Each player starts with 12 pieces arranged on the points, leaving only the central point empty. Pieces move 1 step along any line to an adjacent empty point. Core of Alcarki's action, however, lies in its capture mechanism. A piece captures an opponent's piece by jumping over it to an empty point immediately beyond, similar to checkers. Multiple captures can be made in a single turn if they are available. Crucial rule is that if a capture is possible, it must be made. If multiple captures are possible, the player can choose which sequence to take. The game ends when one player has captured all of the opponent's pieces, or when an opponent cannot make a legal move. This mandatory capture rule is the beating heart of Alcarki's strategic education. It means players are constantly forced into aggressive play, always looking for opportunities to capture, and constantly defending against being captured themselves. This relentless pressure hones a player's ability to spot tactical sequences quickly and to anticipate forced moves from their opponent. There is no passive play in Alcariki. Every move is a statement, a potential threat, or a necessary defense. A young page in a Castilian court, learning the ropes of military strategy, would find Alcariki immensely beneficial. Play Alcariki would drill into him the importance of controlling the center of the board, as central pieces have the most lines and thus the most potential moves and capture opportunities. It would teach him about the danger of leaving pieces isolated as they become easy targets for capture. It would impress upon him the need for rapid assessment of the board, as a missed capture could turn the tide of the game. Alcariki taught players to think about piece value, not just in terms of numbers, but in terms of their position. Piece stuck in a corner might be safe, but it offers little strategic utility. Piece in the center, though more vulnerable, has the potential to dominate the board. This dynamic taught players to weigh safety against opportunity, a common dilemma in real-world strategic planning. The game also provided a direct, tangible lesson in the principle of forced moves. Because captures are mandatory, players can set up sequences of moves that compel their opponent to move into a disadvantageous position, leading to further captures. Mastering this required a deep understanding of tactical patterns and the ability to visualize several moves ahead, predicting the opponent's necessary reactions. This is a skill invaluable for a military commander who might force an enemy into a bottleneck or an ambush by controlling key terrain. Alcariki's popularity spread across the Islamic world and into Europe, particularly during the Moorish presence in Spain. Historical texts from the 10th and 11th centuries mention the game, and archaeological finds confirm its widespread play. It was a game appreciated for its intellectual rigor and its ability to sharpen the mind. It was a game often played by scholars and nobles, seen as a respectable mental exercise. For players, Alcariki provided intense training in defensive positioning. Knowing that any exposed single piece could be captured, players learned to keep their pieces connected, forming defensive structures that prevented easy jumps. This taught the importance of mutual support and the strength of a cohesive formation. It was a lesson in guarding your weakest points, a fundamental concept in any defensive strategy. The game also taught the psychological aspect of strategy. Player could use a seemingly risky move to bait an opponent into a capture that would open up a larger, more devastating sequence of captures for themselves. This required understanding human tendencies, predicting how an opponent might react to an apparent opportunity, and exploiting their aggression. While simpler than chess in terms of piece variety, Alcariki's mandatory capture rule and intricate web of possible moves made it a fiercely competitive game. It was a game that rewarded quick thinking, aggressive play, and an unyielding focus on tactical advantage. It was a perfect microcosm of medieval skirmishes, swift, decisive, and unforgiving of mistakes. The legacy of Alcariki is clear in the development of checkers draughts, which simplified the board and diagonal movement, but retained the core capture mechanism. But in its original form, Alcariki offered a more intricate, diagonal-rich web of connections that provided a greater challenge for strategic minds. It was a game that demanded constant vigilance and an active, aggressive mindset, skills that were not just entertaining but genuinely empowering for individuals navigating the often brutal and competitive landscape of the medieval world. It shaped minds to be decisive, to seek advantage, and to understand the relentless pressure of tactical engagement. Number 3. Rhythmomachia, the mathematical battle for higher minds. Cast your mind back to the quiet cloisters of medieval monasteries and the hallowed halls of nascent universities. Here, amidst the study of theology, philosophy, and the liberal arts, a truly unique and intellectually demanding board game flourished. This was Rhythmomachia, meaning the battle of numbers, a game so intricate and complex that it was considered an exercise specifically designed for scholars, mathematicians, and future leaders. It was not just about strategy. It was about demonstrating profound mathematical understanding, logical reasoning, and a philosophical approach to warfare. Rhythmomachia was a game played on a board similar to a chessboard, often 8 times 16 squares, though variations existed. What truly set it apart were its pieces. They were not kings, knights, or pawns, but numbers, triangles, squares, and circles, each representing specific numerical values and relationships. These pieces were arranged on the board in complex starting formations, and their movement and capture rules were directly tied to arithmetical and geometric progressions. For example, a piece might move a number of squares equal to its own value, or a piece might capture an opponent's piece if its value was a perfect square of the opponent's value, or if it was the sum of 2 opponents' pieces. There were various capture methods, including capture by meeting, where the sum of 2 pieces matched a third piece, siege, where pieces captured by forming a numerical progression, and ambush. The ultimate goal was not simply to capture all opponent pieces, but to achieve specific numerical configurations on the board, representing victory conditions that were far more abstract and intellectually challenging. For instance, creating an arithmetic, geometric, or harmonic progression with a certain number of pieces. A young scholar, perhaps a student, at the University of Paris in the 13th century, would often be found poring over a Rhythmomachia board. This was not a game of intuition. It was a game of pure logic and calculation. Every move required complex mental arithmetic, understanding number theory, and foreseeing the numerical consequences of placing or moving a piece. Trained the mind to hold multiple numerical relationships in active memory and to manipulate them for strategic advantage. Rhythmomachia was not a game for the uninitiated. Mastery signaled a high level of education and intellectual prowess. It was considered a component of the quadrivium, the higher division of the medieval liberal arts curriculum, which included arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. Playing Rhythmomachia was a practical application of these theoretical subjects, bridging the gap between abstract mathematical concepts and tangible strategic thinking. The game forced players to engage with the principles of number, series, ratios, and proportions. Player needed to understand how to build up a numerical advantage, how to disrupt the opponent's numerical sequences, and how to position pieces to create the specific numerical patterns required for victory. It was a unique blend of strategic positioning, common in games like chess, combined with a deep layer of mathematical computation. Historical records show that Rhythmomachia was popularized by the philosopher Gerbert of Aurillac, later Pope Sylvester II, in the 10th century, who studied in Islamic Spain and introduced elements of Arabic numerals and mathematical thought to Europe. Its popularity peaked in the 11th and 12th centuries, particularly in scholastic circles. The game was explicitly described in various treatises and manuals, detailing its rules and strategic principles, emphasizing its use as an educational tool rather than merely a recreational one. For a medieval ruler or administrator, a deep understanding of Rhythmomachia could translate into practical skills. It trained them to think systematically about resources, population, and logistics, all quantities that needed careful numerical management. It fostered a mindset that valued precision, logical inference, and the ability to identify complex patterns, whether those patterns were numerical or related to the organization of a kingdom. The different victory conditions in Rhythmomachia also offered a profound lesson in strategic flexibility. Sometimes, the goal might be to capture all opponents' pieces, a simpler, more aggressive objective. Other times it might be to create a specific, subtle numerical progression that demonstrated a higher level of intellectual dominance. This taught players to adjust their strategy based on the defined objective, to prioritize different goals, and to recognize that victory could be achieved through various means, not just brute force. It was a game that valued intellectual elegance over mere victory. A well-executed numerical capture, or the formation of a perfect progression, was admired not just for its efficacy, but for its mathematical beauty. This encouraged a deeper level of engagement with the game's underlying principles, fostering a love for logical problem-solving. Rhythmomachia served as a testament to the medieval mind's capacity for abstraction and its desire to integrate knowledge across different disciplines. It was a game where arithmetic was warfare, and numbers were soldiers, trained individuals to think in terms of complex systems, to see the interconnections between different elements, and to plan with rigorous numerical accuracy. For those destined for intellectual leadership, it was an indispensable tool shaping minds to be logical, analytical, and profoundly strategic in an age that was just beginning to rediscover the full power of rational thought. Number 2. Hnefatafl, the Viking King's War Game. From the frigid fjords of Norway to the wind-swept shores of Ireland, and even reaching the Byzantine Empire, a powerful and asymmetric game of war was played with fierce intensity by the Vikings and their contemporaries. This was Hnefatafl, often simply called Tafla, a family of board games that stood as the strategic counterpoint to chess for centuries. It was not just a game. It was a visceral simulation of raid and defense, of a king under siege, and of the brutal cunning required to survive and conquer in the early medieval world. Hnefatafl boards varied in size, often 11 times 11 or 13 times 13 squares, with a special central square known as the konakis or throne. The game featured two unequal forces, a king piece, surrounded by a smaller number of his loyal defenders, positioned in the center, and a much larger attacking force, usually double the number of defenders, arrayed along the edges of the board. All pieces moved like the rook in chess, any number of empty squares, horizontally or vertically. King's goal was to escape to any of the four corner squares of the board. The attacker's goal was to capture the king. Pieces, including the king, were captured by sandwiching them between two opposing pieces along a line of movement. This asymmetry was the defining characteristic of Hnefatafl and precisely what made it such a potent tool for strategic education. It immediately immersed players in the mindset of either a desperate outnumbered defense or an overwhelming yet potentially clumsy assault. A Viking chieftain, perhaps Ragnar Lodbrok, preparing for a raid, would find Hnefatafl to be a useful exercise. Playing Hnefatafl would force him to think like both the raider and the besieged. As the attacker, he had to learn how to coordinate a larger force, to form a net, and to avoid allowing the king to slip through. This taught patience, the importance of maintaining strong lines, and the danger of overextending. It mirrored the challenges of leading a large raiding party, ensuring cohesion and preventing a wily enemy from escaping. As the king's player, the chieftain learned the art of desperate defense and audacious escape. With fewer pieces, every defender was precious. King's player had to use their limited resources to create diversions, block paths, and sacrifice pieces strategically to open up escape routes. This fostered resourcefulness, quick thinking under pressure, and the ability to spot the single narrow path to victory when surrounded. It was a direct lesson in how to survive when outnumbered, a frequent reality for medieval lords or isolated settlements. Archaeological finds across Scandinavia, Britain, and beyond testify to the game's popularity. Intricately carved Hnefatafl pieces have been found in Viking burials, suggesting its profound cultural and strategic importance. The game was not just played for entertainment, it was a revered mental exercise, a way to test and develop the very skills needed for warfare and leadership. The king's escape to a corner square symbolized a successful retreat or the outmaneuvering of a larger enemy force. It taught the king's player that sometimes the goal was not to destroy the enemy, but simply to survive and fight another day. For the attacking player, it taught the frustration of a missed opportunity, the need for relentless pressure, and the consequence of leaving even the smallest opening. Nefertafel also taught players about the concept of choke points and open ground. The attackers would try to create bottlenecks to funnel the king into a trap, while the king's side would try to open up wide lanes for escape. This dynamic directly related to military tactics, controlling passes, bridges, or open fields to dictate the terms of engagement. The game rules also often included special conditions for the king, such as being able to capture only when supported by another piece, or being immediately captured if he moved onto the central throne square after leaving it. These nuances added layers of complexity, forcing players to adapt their understanding of the board and piece interactions. The very nature of the game, with its central king and encircling attackers, provided a stark visual metaphor for the political and military realities of the age. Kings were often besieged physically or politically, and survival depended on cunning, loyal defenders and a clear vision of escape. The game offered a safe space to explore these high-stakes scenarios. Nefertafel was more than just a pre-chess curiosity. It was a robust system for developing key strategic competencies: defensive planning, offensive coordination, resource allocation under duress, and the ability to adapt to a changing battlefield. It instilled the psychological resilience needed to face overwhelming odds, and the patience required to execute a coordinated attack. For the Viking warrior, the Anglo-Saxon lord, or the Celtic chieftain Nefertafel was a fundamental lesson in the art of war, a game that shaped minds to not just survive, but to master the brutal world they inhabited. It was a game that echoed the clang of swords and the shouts of battle, all played out silently on a wooden board. Number 1. Shatranj, the grandfather of chess and the ultimate strategic arena. If there was one game that truly defined strategic education in the medieval world, one game that permeated every level of society from humble villagers to mighty emperors, it was Shatranj. This ancient Persian game, the direct ancestor of modern chess, arrived in Europe via the Islamic world and fundamentally reshaped how people thought about conflict, planning, and intellectual prowess. Shatranj was not merely a game. It was a grand simulation of warfare, a living diagram of power dynamics, and the ultimate test of foresight and logical reasoning. Shatranj, meaning 100 worries, or 100 dilemmas in Persian, is the game from which our modern chess directly evolved, carrying over most of its core mechanics. Played on an 8x8 grid, it featured a king, Shah, a general, Furs, an elephant, Fil, a horse, Asbem, a chariot, Rook, and pawns, Piyada. While many piece movements were similar to modern chess, some key differences profoundly altered the game's strategic flow. The general, for instance, moved one square diagonally, limiting its range. The elephant moved exactly 2 squares diagonally, jumping over the intervening square, making it a powerful but somewhat restricted piece. There was no castling, and pawns could not move 2 squares on their first move or capture en passant. These differences meant Shatranj was a slower, more deliberate game than modern chess. Pieces moved with less agility, making large-scale tactical maneuvers less common and placing a greater emphasis on long-term positional play and piece development. This made it a perfect training ground for patience, deep planning, and the art of incrementally building an advantage. Caliph in Baghdad, a king in Cordoba, or a Holy Roman Emperor in Aachen would be found sitting before a Shatranj board. Each piece represented a unit in their army or a member of their court. The king was the absolute ruler, needing constant protection. The general was the key advisor, moving cautiously. Chariots were powerful but constrained, like siege engines or heavy cavalry. The horses were nimble, like light cavalry or scouts. The elephants, powerful but with distinct movement patterns, were akin to specialized, slow-moving units. And the pawns, the backbone, were the foot soldiers crucial for defense and creating pathways. Playing Shatranj instilled an unparalleled sense of strategic foresight. With fewer sudden attacks and more deliberate positioning, players were forced to think many moves ahead, to anticipate their opponent's long-term intentions, and to plan intricate sequences of maneuvers. It taught the importance of controlling the center of the board, of developing pieces harmoniously, and of understanding the relative strengths and weaknesses of each piece. The objective remained checkmate, trapping the opponent's king. This goal instilled the ultimate lesson in strategic thinking. The entire game revolved around the safety of the most important piece. Every action, every sacrifice, every attack ultimately served the purpose of protecting one's own king while relentlessly pursuing the opponent's. This directly translated to the medieval ruler's primary duty: protecting his realm and his own person. Historical texts are replete with references to Shatranj. From the Golden Age of Islam, scholars like Al-Adli wrote comprehensive treatises on Shatranj in the 9th century, detailing openings, endgames, and problems. These texts reveal a highly sophisticated understanding of the game's strategy. It was a game beloved by Harun al-Rashid, the famous Abbasid Caliph, and it spread quickly through trade routes and intellectual exchange from Persia to India, through the Byzantine Empire and into Europe via Spain. For medieval nobility, playing Shatranj was considered a mark of intellectual refinement and strategic acumen. It was a game of kings and commanders because it trained them to think like kings and commanders. It taught the principles of flanking maneuvers, pincer movements, and the psychological art of baiting an opponent into a trap. It sharpened their ability to assess complex situations, identify threats, and formulate multifaceted plans. The game also taught a vital lesson in humility and resilience. Even the most brilliant player could make a mistake or face an unexpected counter-strategy. A lost game was not just a defeat, but a learning opportunity. It fostered a disciplined approach to problem-solving, requiring players to analyze their errors and improve their tactical vision. Shatranj was more than just a contest of wits. It was a cultural phenomenon. It fostered intellectual camaraderie, with players studying openings, discussing grand strategies, and even composing intricate problems. It was a universal language of strategy, understood by diverse peoples across vast territories. The enduring legacy of Shatranj, culminating in its evolution into modern chess, is a testament to its power as the ultimate strategic educator. Provided a safe, abstract environment to explore the dynamics of conflict, to practice decision-making under pressure, and to develop the kind of comprehensive foresight required for true leadership. In a world where power was often brutally asserted, Shatranj offered a different kind of conquest, the conquest of the mind, a victory achieved through superior intellect and impeccable strategic planning. It truly was the medieval school for the strategic mind, shaping generations of thinkers, leaders, and warriors.